What would you do to handle the problem of the animal movement if you were the CEO of a factory farming company? Lobby for laws to prevent filming on factory farms?
The so-called ag-gag laws are gaining support across the Midwest and opposition from across the country.
Aggressively litigate against activists who rescue animals?
Costco brought a federal lawsuit against me, my colleagues, and the Direct Action Everywhere network, attempting to ban us from Costco stores and seek tens of thousands of dollars in damages.
Infiltrate the animal movement and sabotage from within? It's an interesting perspective to consider, because here you have somebody whose motivations and goals are almost exactly opposite to a vegan's. Vegans feel a moral responsibility to try to reduce the number of animals on factory farms. Factory farming CEOs have not only an economic incentive, but a fiduciary responsibility to try to increase the number of animals on factory farms, all else being equal. Now, if you're the CEO of a factory farming company, it's a bit of a challenging environment. Look at the UK. Average meat consumption decreased 17% between 2008 and 2019, while the number of people avoiding meat altogether almost doubled during the same period. The CEO of a factory farming company is overseeing a period where average meat consumption is going down because an effective animal movement is getting more and more people to give up meat. That's a problem for them. If this trend looks like it's continuing in a way which is going to leave factory farming companies with loads of assets like slaughterhouses and factory farms which are now worthless, so-called stranded assets, the shareholders are probably going to vote to get rid of that CEO in favour of one with a better chance of fixing that. In other words, the people who are CEOs of factory farming companies are, by definition, those who are willing to most ruthlessly focus on the profitability and/or growth of factory farming. That means slashing costs, like animal welfare measures, boosting demand by funding misinformation on health and the environment, and crushing opposition in the animal movement. Now, when I say they want to crush opposition in the animal movement, obviously they can't just go mowing down people in the tofu aisle. But they can't do nothing either. The animal movement is an existential threat to their businesses. Well, what can they do? They've got lots of resources, but they need to stick within the bounds of the law. They can employ people to run all sorts of interferences as long as they're technically sticking to the rules. We've already seen evidence of how they support misleading science, like the Dublin Declaration.
We recently designed or drafted a manuscript that is called the Dublin Declaration.
And attempt to criminalise activist activity, for example, with ag-gag laws making it illegal to film on factory farms. One other method that they might consider is infiltrating and sabotaging the animal movement from within. In 2008, Mother Jones exposed a now infamous corporate spy known as Mary Lou Sapone. Sapone, who sometimes went by her maiden name Mary McFate, was made famous for infiltrating gun control groups on behalf of the NRA. But her resume of infiltrating activist groups goes back further than that. In the late 1980s, the animal movement in the US was focused on vivisection. Sapone was employed by the US Surgical Corporation to infiltrate an animal rights group in Connecticut. According to reporting by Mother Jones, Sapone gathered evidence on an activist who would later serve jail time for planting a pipe bomb near the parking space of the company's CEO. The activist would eventually accuse Sapone of coaxing her into the plot. Now look, I'm not advocating that anybody should be planting pipe bombs, and whether or not this activist was coaxed into doing it, clearly she's responsible for her own actions. But the point here is that there is evidence of corporate spying on animal rights groups going back at least 30 years. Given how many resources we know the animal industries put into lobbying and misinformation today, wouldn't we be fools not to assume that there is also some attempt at sabotage going on? If you were to try to sabotage the modern animal movement, what kind of strategies might you use? You would want to behave in a way which is disruptive to the movement's goals without making it obvious that you're trying to sabotage. One thing that you could do is to amplify and spread talking points which feasibly seem like something that a vegan might believe, but in fact advance the interests of factory farms. In a moment, we're going to take a look at the saboteurs' top talking points for the animal movement. Before we do that, it's worth noting that you can find plenty of vegans who really do believe these things sincerely. In fact, even if these talking points were being maliciously spread by an undercover meat industry operative, they would be being spread to naive vegans in the hope that they would repeat them. So anytime you hear these talking points from vegans, it's more likely that you're hearing them from a naive vegan than from a saboteur themselves. So don't watch this video, notice some talking points that your friend said, and then go and accuse them of being a saboteur. Instead, send them this video and let them be reassured that the meat industry has been absolutely cynical in spreading these talking points and seeding them within the vegan movement. Let's take a look at the saboteurs' top talking points. Number 1. Insisting on other forms of purity. Not only is this an extremely effective way to limit the size and growth of the animal movement, it's also a very feasible thing to do in left-leaning movements. You can find people who will say you can't be a part of the animal movement unless you're also an anti-capitalist. I mean, what a brilliant way to cut more than in half what is already a tiny movement. And why don't we alienate some potential funders while we're at it, by the way? From the animal's perspective, this sort of purity testing on non-animal issues is extremely unproductive. It limits our growth as a movement and it hurts animals. We need to stop it. Number 2. Opposing clear welfare labelling. You can find vegans who will oppose any welfare labelling schemes ostensibly because they endorse some level of animal exploitation. Now, there are misleading welfare labelling schemes out there. The fundamental problem is that optional welfare labels only apply to high welfare products, and they leave factory farmed products completely unlabelled. What we need is mandatory welfare labels, which apply to all animal products, including, in fact especially, factory farmed products. No clear rules around welfare labelling means that factory farms can slap any old welfare washed label on there and sell factory farmed products as if they're high welfare. Number 3. Opposing alternative proteins. If you don't want to eat things that remind you of meat, that's totally up to you. But don't buy into the meat industry talking points that plant-based meat alternatives are unhealthy because they're ultra-processed. This is just not true. I've written about this issue extensively in this article called The Ultra-Processed Myth, and in this paper, plant-based animal products are healthier and more environmentally sustainable than animal products. Again, if you want to do a whole foods plant-based diet, more power to you. Nobody is going to force Beyond Burgers down your throat. But please stop spreading the misinformation that plant-based meat alternatives are unhealthy because they're ultra-processed. Not only is it untrue, it hurts animals and it helps the factory farms. Again, please bear in mind that while these 3 talking points would be excellent for a meat industry saboteur to adopt, you're most likely going to hear them from sincere vegans if you do hear them. So please don't go to the next vegan conference and shout saboteur at everyone who says these things. Or maybe do actually, that could be quite a funny way to raise this conversation. So, are there saboteurs in the animal movement? Honestly, I think it's more likely than not that there are, based on the economic incentives at play and based on the use of similar tactics against the animal movement in recent history. That said, sabotage is very hard to identify accurately. The fact is that poor strategy looks identical to sabotage. The main point of this video is to encourage vegans to be a little bit more critical of talking points that they might have picked up, and think about the impact of those talking points on the vegan movement and on animals. Instead of insisting that all of our allies have to be aligned with all of our positions, let's make space for an ideologically diverse set of allies to help advance the cause for animals. Instead of writing off all animal welfare labelling schemes as welfare washing, advocate for mandatory schemes which make it clear which products are coming from factory farms. Instead of talking about plant-based meats being ultra-processed, talk about them being lower in saturated fat and calories while being higher in fibre than meat from animals. If you go looking for sabotage, you probably won't find it, but you might find that some of your talking points could be reframed more constructively to help animals. If you want to get smarter in the way that you talk about vegan issues, you know what to do. This is Bryant, PhD. Cheers.